Yeah, it's definitely like an us versus them, and that's going to wear on you. And so I left thinking I'm going to be one of the good ones. I'm going to go into the birth doula community and I'm going to change it for the better, and I'm going to be one of the good ones. And turns out like the birth doula community changed me. I realized that the vast majority of doulas were very intelligent, grounded individuals that really were just they just cared, and they were very passionate. Many of them were people who had given birth in the hospital. I mean, they were my prior patients, hypothetically. They were people that had gone into the hospital, had their babies, were harmed by the medical system, and went out and wanted to change that circumstance for other people. And I just realized how much I was wrong, not only about doulas, but also by like what kind of turns a doula into, the kind of person who like sort of gets in between their patient or the patient and the provider and stuff. It
All right, Caitlyn, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've never had somebody like you on the podcast because you have quite a breadth of knowledge around birth. You're a doula. You were a labor and delivery nurse. Are you still a labor and delivery nurse? And you're training now to become a midwife?
I'm not working as a labor and delivery nurse, but I am still a nurse, and I'm in training to become a certified nurse midwife. Yeah.
Right on. So in addition to being a very invested, not only in through your education, but also like your kind of career path, your calling, being in birth work, you have this incredible resume of other things. So you were in the Air Force and you were a medic in the Air Force. And then, of course, fast forward and you're in nursing, you're going to be attending births. You've got a great TikTok and social media presence. You're kind of critical of the system at times in ways that I certainly align with. But then you also had this period of your life where you were in beauty pageants and you're Miss United States, which is from 2020. Is that right?
Yeah, Mrs. United States
Oh,
2020.
Mrs. United States. Okay. So you've got the beauty and the brains. I'm sure you get a lot of shit for that. So let's start there. Let's just get that one out of the way because I'm sure a lot of people are just going to be wondering. I think people think that being in pageants is like a career path in and of itself, but you certainly are just adding another feather to your cap. So tell me a little bit about what that process was like. And do you get a lot of shit because you are also so professionally invested and have all these other credentials and degrees?
Yeah, I feel like, especially if you're on social media or on TikTok and have any sort of following, you kind of get shit for everything.
Yeah,
So of course I
yeah,
have.
me too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
you would know, I know. Yeah, anything you say, but I have gotten shit, especially because, on TikTok, I have a lot of feminist perspectives. I am a feminist, and so people ask, well, how can you be a part of beauty pageants because it's such an anti-feminist sort of thing, getting up on stage and walking around in a swimsuit and having people judge your beauty. But I don't know, I've never seen it that way. I really looked at beauty pageants as a way of sort of like like personal development, and kind of learning more about myself, because when you go through a beauty pageant you have to understand all the thoughts in your head and be able to articulate them really well. So it helps you grow as a person, but also I think that women should be able to do whatever they want, and I like doing it. I think it's fun, and for that reason I think it's very feminist to
Yeah,
go out
right.
and do a beauty pageant, because we're more than just one thing. You can't
Sure.
just not everybody wants to just be a credential. They can be a little bit more than that.
I think if somebody offered me like a contract to pose nude or something, and I've worked very hard also on my like physique over the years. I've gone through periods of not being able to take as great of care of myself, but I've always managed to, to really kind of find time, even with two little girls of my own, just to find time to work out. If somebody was like, "Hey, it's amazing that you have abs and like you've got some back muscles and you've got all these other credentials," I'd be like, thank you. Like that's great. That's thank you for acknowledging all this hard work. And so not that that's the same as your trajectory, but it is interesting that people who claim to be feminist will continue to try to tell a woman what feminism is and what it means to be a woman, and how they should be, not even just articulating their life, but also like what is your presence online, as if there's some sort of like neat box as to what a strong, powerful woman should or could do. So I think that's actually really interesting.
Yeah. And I think that that's kind of the whole goal of as a feminist, like challenging those expectations, right? So, you don't have to be just one thing, one flavor.
When you were in, so explain to me real quickly. So there's so many different major pageants. Mrs. United States. How does that differ from like, what is it? The Miss America? Is that the one, the big one? Like Donald Trump was
So
involved with and
yeah,
stuff?
there's a few big ones. So there's Miss USA, which is the one that goes on to become Miss Universe, and then there's Miss America. They go on to Miss World. Miss United States, that pageant system that I was in, was actually the one that was featured in Miss Congeniality. I don't know if you remember
Oh
the
yeah, I
line.
do remember that with Sandra Bullock, right?
Yeah, yeah. So
Mm.
those are kind of the big three. But the Miss United States pageant, the reason I wanted to go for that one is because I was, I'm married, and it was the only one, or was the best one, I think, for married women. It was the first married women's pageant. So I was like, I want to do that one.
Where did you find yourself amongst a bunch of other very accomplished and very articulate and just really like invested, powerful women?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Everybody there, especially the married women. Because the
Yeah.
married women, I mean, they have a lot of experience under their belt, with whatever it is they've chosen to devote their life to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's cool. I don't want to belabor, that part of your life, but I do think it is really, really, it's just nice to have met somebody so I can actually ask about some of this stuff. My wife, when she was very, very young, she was into modeling and whatnot. And I think we all just developed these sort of, I don't know. It's their judge. It's just straight up judgment and prejudice, maybe around people that are just really beautiful. And but you've also taken things quite far, I think, in your own personal life. Tell me about your experience as a medic with the Air Force.
It was great. The military life is obviously very different than, my life as a beauty queen or whatever else. But I gained a lot of really great experience. It's really where I found midwifery. I was 18 years old when I joined the military, and I didn't know what a midwife was. And that's when I met a midwife. There's a lot of midwives that are in the military, they're service members. Um, and I had a mentor that I just loved the way that she talked to her patients, the way that she cared for them, the way, like just her empathy, you could just feel it. And it took me about 6 months of working with her, and I was like, that's what I want to do.
Wow, no kidding. So did you work as a midwife before becoming an RN, or was it the other way around? You got your RN and then pursued this path?
Yeah, so I became a nurse first. I was a tech in the military, a medic, and then I became a nurse, and then I worked as a doula for 2 years while I went through school. And now I'm about 6 months or so away from graduating, a little bit more than that. I'm graduating in December of my midwifery program.
And you're going to be a certified nurse midwife, correct?
Yes.
That's what the plan is. Is that a master's or I know it's a graduate level degree, but I know some programs are even doctorate level. Which one is it that you're going to finish
It's a
with?
master's.
A
It's a
master's.
master's level.
So there's all this tension out there. I didn't prepare you for this question, but there's a lot of tension out there between the various types of midwives. We have certified professional midwives, we have licensed midwives, we have direct entry midwives, which kind of encompasses a couple type, but they generally practice outside of the hospital. We've got radical midwives, independent midwives. We've got what used to be called lay midwives, and now that's kind of there's a little bit of that in a variety of these. So as a certified nurse midwife, a lot of midwives out there would be, sticking their noses up because you're a part of the system. You don't represent the radical revolution that we're bringing in. What do you say to them with regards to how you sort of found yourself in this training program?
Well, I don't know. Personally, I'd say that there shouldn't be a divide between, certified nurse midwives and any other type of midwife. I think that all of them are necessary, right? And that's part of the reason why, I chose the certified nurse midwife route is because I wanted to go where the majority of the patients are going. They're choosing the hospital system for better or for worse.
Yeah.
Um, and and the thing is that, lay midwives or independent midwives, whoever, out there that's not practicing in the hospital, they're also going where patients need them. Just different types of patients in rural areas or people in rural areas that are giving birth that don't have access to, a birth center or don't have access to a hospital. So I think they're all necessary. And I don't think that there should be a divide, but there certainly is one. There certainly is a stigma,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah.
especially, for lay midwives that maybe haven't gotten like any formal training or medical training. I feel that for sure.
I know that a lot of CNMs, certified nurse midwife, for those listening, a CNM attending a birth, I think this last statistic I read was somewhere between 95 and 90% of births attended by certified nurse midwives are in the hospital. Are you planning to practice exclusively in the hospital, or maybe venture out as you did when you were a doula? Maybe. I don't know. Did you
So
attend home births as a doula?
what was that?
Did you attend home births as a doula?
Yes, yeah, I did. So it my answer to this question would have been different if you had asked me 6 months ago. But I actually listened to a podcast and it kind of shifted my perspective a little bit. Originally my intention was always to work in the hospital. And then when I worked as a doula, I realized that I love home birth and I love birth center. Um, and that's kind of my dream is to one day either own a birth center or at least work in one that I really like that has like the same values that I have. But more recently, I've kind of thought a little bit more about, what my whole goal of being a midwife and taking care of women, kind of what brought me to this profession in the first place was, meeting women where they're at and
Yeah.
giving them what they need and not really serving my own interests. So as much as working in a birth center and a home birth would be, my dream job, and I would really enjoy it, so many of the people that I think need the kind of advocacy that I'm looking to give are going to be giving birth in the hospital. So for the majority of my career, that's what I anticipate, is for me to be working there. I think one day maybe I'll reward myself and start that birth center and move out of there and maybe do that as I get old and gray.
Yeah, I mean, you and I are actually the same. We just realized this, guys, before we started recording. But Caitlin lives in Nashville. Is it okay that I say that? Sorry, I shouldn't.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
Um, not going to give your street name or anything. I live in Louisville. We're about, what is that, 3 hours, 2.5 hours, something like that, depending on how fast you drive down 65. But we're in the same part of the country. Maybe we'll open a birth center someday together. I don't know.
Oh, that'd be great. Don't tempt me.
Well, there's many midwives in our area that have reached out wanting to do the same thing. I'd like to incorporate death as well because I'm also a hospice doctor. So we have birth and death on the same piece of like a farm acreage, of a farm, and be able to do both of these incredible rites of passage in the same place. But I keep saying I'm going to do it, and it's just more projects keep piling up, and it keeps getting shifted. So when the time is right, the universe will bring all of us together, and we'll create this dreamy new center for people to give birth. You've there's been I'm reading between the lines in what you're saying, the type of advocacy, women that need the type of advocacy that you can provide. What do you think actually? You before we started recording, you kind of clarified that you went through this. I don't want to make it look hierarchical in any way, but you have seen birth from so many different you have so many different perspectives throughout your experience. How does that, collective experience make you so unique as an advocate? Because we haven't even talked about your own pregnancy. So you can also start by talking about that if that was a part of it.
Oh, it all was a part of it. I think the biggest shift for me was, I worked as a nurse And my perspective and who I was back then is very different than who I am now. And my philosophy and my approach towards patients is completely different now.
Is that a labor and delivery nurse, Caitlyn?
What was that?
You were a labor and delivery nurse?
Yeah,
Gotcha.
I was. And so when I worked in that capacity, I like in the interest of self-reflection and transparency, I was pretty judgmental. I don't think I was it was on the forefront of my mind, but in the back of my mind, I judged people for, coming in at 8, 9 centimeters dilated and not getting an epidural. Why not? Why wouldn't you, get an epidural? Modern medicine, like
Sure,
I just
sure.
didn't understand it. I was also very young and I wasn't, educated on really all the different reasons why people make the choices that they do. And so I left nursing to go to school to become a midwife and wanted to maintain those skills, became a doula in the interest of maintaining those skills. And I wanted to be one of the good ones because, of course, if you work as a nurse for long enough, you'll get in, sort of a distaste for doulas. It kind of just rubs off. I mean, it's toxic. We hate doulas in the nursing field. Not everybody, of course. A lot of nurses love
The
doulas, but
doctors are with you though. Like everybody's in the break room or whatever, just you bitching and moaning about X, Y, or Z. And then when you're actually on
yes.
the other side of that, you're like, oh man, they're probably talking about us like that. Went through that exact same thing in our first birth, which was in the hospital, but it's like, gee, that's not nice. The culture of the labor and delivery units. I mean, it is a high acuity unit. People are under a lot of stress. It's long hours. There's oftentimes not a lot of mutual respect between maybe the doctors and the nurses and the other staff. I mean, it's a hard place to work. So I always try to be as compassionate as I can. But you're right. There is a bit of a toxicity there around non-hospital based birth attendants, doulas, childbirth educators. It's just it's the
Oh, yes.
there's this othering that takes place. So
Yeah.
on both sides of that. So anyways, continue.
Yeah, it's definitely like an us versus them, and that's going to wear on you. And so I left thinking I'm going to be one of the good ones. I'm going to go into the birth doula community and I'm going to change it for the better and I'm going to be one of the good ones. And turns out like the birth doula community changed me. I realized that the vast majority of doulas were very intelligent, grounded individuals that really they just cared and they were very passionate. Many of them were people who had given birth in the hospital. I mean, they were my prior patients, hypothetically. They were people that had gone into the hospital, had their babies, were harmed by the medical system, and went out and wanted to change that circumstance for other people. And I just realized how much I was wrong, not only about doulas, but also by like what kind of turns a doula into, the kind of person who like sort of gets in between their patient or the patient and the provider and stuff. It wasn't what I thought it was. You go out and you see how different all the different hospitals are. You live in this bubble when you're, as a nurse, you think that all of the hospitals are doing the same things that you're doing, and then you get out as a doula and you see all these different hospitals. They all have different cultures. You start to see things from your patient's perspective, from like the client's perspective, how they're being talked to, how they're not being listened to, things that are happening to, your client that they don't even know about. You see, providers trying to, rip their perineum or, cut episiotomies without telling them, or break their bag of water without telling them. And
Oh
as
yeah.
the patient, you would never know. And as the nurse, you're focused on other things. But from the doula perspective, that's all you're
You're
there to
seeing
do is to support.
everything. Yeah.
What was that?
You're seeing everything. Like
Yes.
it's almost like well, we'll talk about what a doula is because I'd love to hear you maybe clarify for those out there who don't know, but the doula being the ultimate advocate and support person, they have no other job but to be very, very focused on what is happening in that moment. So
And you're connecting with the person from the beginning, often has the beginning of their pregnancy all the way through their birth. You're there with them in their home before they go into the hospital. You don't get to see all of that as a nurse. And then you care about them in a way that you can't really connect with your patients as a nurse. And so when you see these things happening to them, you get really fired up about that. And then the way that you're treated as a doula, I was a nurse and I had, respect that, I commanded respect from my colleagues, from the doctors that I worked with and all that. I had good relationships with all of them. And then I start working as a doula and it's like you're invisible and nobody wants you there. and anything you have to say is like, a problem. It's totally different experience. And I just realized, I'm like, yeah, I see what's happening now with a clear perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I actually I was kind of saved in some way by doulas. By the way, when you said that, it reminded me of those like bumper stickers people have when they adopted a dog and they're like, who saved who, you know? I just do this all the time here in Louisville. So the when I remember working with doulas, it was sort of like, okay, I'm the young resident. I trained out in LA. This is years ago, but when they had a doula there, it was an opportunity to get to know this person, this couple in such intimate ways that I could never understand because they are coming into me, they're in labor. If you take the doula aside, it is your opportunity to get to understand this person's story, their values, the obstacles that they've faced, and what their hopes and expectations maybe are for this experience that they're about to go through, which is far more, in my view, far more than a medical procedure, as it is a really, really incredibly important transformative, experience. So the doula comes in, and if you get to know the doulas, like the family also loves you. So it wasn't completely selflessly, but once I understood, okay, there's a history of some trauma here, or this is an IVF pregnancy after 5 miscarriages, or whatever else, it really helps you show up in service to them, not coming in with your little captain hat saying, hey, here's how things are going to go, which is immediately, as you know, an immediate way to just erode whatever trust you may have had already kind of built with them. So doulas play a big role. It's funny that if hospitals realized the role that doulas play in the community, their doulas are kind of like the ultimate PR reps, for better or for worse, for the hospital, because they're out there saying, hey, this hospital really feels good. This hospital
That's
feels
true.
very sterile. So any CEOs of hospitals out there, directors of nursing or whatever, just listen up. What is a doula? I've had a couple doulas on the show, but I think it bears repeating. What is the role of a doula?
Well, do was a non-medical support person, and it's vague because it's supposed to be vague. They do everything that could be involved in support. They support clients by providing education and information about their options. They support them by picking up the phone if their clients emotionally struggling with something during their pregnancy. They answer questions. They show up for them in their labor and provide physical support, hands-on support, rubbing their back or pushing on their hips. Just everything to kind of get them through pregnancy and birth, and then beyond as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that sums it up really, really nicely. And doulas, especially in communities that are relatively underserved, who maybe don't have very easy access to not just healthcare services, but sort of respectful conversation throughout their pregnancy, specifically Black women in inner city communities. Doulas are playing a very, very pivotal role in advocating for them and helping them navigate the system that has historically not done a great job of making them feel very welcome or comfortable, or even safe for that matter. Um, so yeah, so you come to this as a medic, as a tech, in the Air Force, as a doula, as a labor and delivery nurse, and now you're training to become a certified nurse midwife. You might be balancing out your practice between hospital, home, birth center, whatever, but the world is kind of your oyster. You're an advanced practitioner at this point. Um, and despite sort of being a product of the system, as we say, as am I. I mean, I am heavily invested. I have given them so much money that I don't know if I'll ever be able to pay it off. Uh, it's hard to then kind of straddle this line of advocate and kind of I don't like the word truth teller, but sort of just helping, just remaining curious, I suppose. Like I remember you did a video recently about glucola, or screening for gestational diabetes, or any of the other advocacy pieces that you've put out on TikTok or social media. We tend to get a lot of shit when people who are within the system are speaking in a way that may not be in alignment with the practice du jour of somebody working in the system. So I'm not going to ask you the vague question of like, how do you navigate that? What I will ask you is, how long do you think you're going to last in the system doing the things that are expected of the culture of whatever practice it is that you join before you either, butt heads with the wrong person or just decide to hell with this. I'm going to have to do this on my own, in my own way, whatever that means.
Oh man, isn't that the question? That question has plagued me for the past like year and a half as I have learned more about what it's going to mean to be a part of the system.
Hmm.
I have not been able to answer that question for myself because I do wonder. I mean, I wonder if even getting a job, people will see my critical posts on TikTok and not want to hire me. I don't think that'll be the case, but even so, when I get into the system, yeah, it's like there are a lot of things that I'm not going to jive with. And I guess what I plan to do is for as long as I can, kind of play the game a little bit. And that's kind of going back to what I said before, right? Like meeting the patients and the people where they are, right? And going to the hospital where you know that they're giving birth because these are the places where, they need you the most kind of thing. It's also in those systems where you need the most change, right? We need to see it completely evolve from where it is right now. So I think part of that is playing the game a little bit, you know,
Yeah.
and biting your tongue, but that's hard. It's hard to do. It's hard to imagine doing that because morally and ethically speaking, biting my tongue might involve making decisions and acting in a way that's not in line with my principles and my like core values and the reason that I'm, became a midwife in the first place.
God, I mean, you're speaking right to my heart. Imagine just how, like, not that you're not my therapist, but imagine going through from the age of 18 or whatever, saying, I'm going to be a pre-med student. And then you go and through, and then you take a test and you get into med school and you take a bunch of other tests. And then you get into residency somehow out in LA. And immediately you're like, oh my God, this is not what I signed up for. And then you get to the end, you're like, okay, I can do whatever I want. But you're looking back at this institutionalized educational program and realizing just how broken you feel and maybe out of touch with the real reality of what we're here to do in honoring this rite of passage. I eventually had to be fired, and it wasn't for any, it was something COVID related, believe it or not. But I eventually had to be fired for that nudge to happen, for me to step away, because it is like, oh, I want to be in this system. I want to change this. And maybe I've just become a little bit more cynical now, but it just seems like this Goliath that is just not going. It's like turning an aircraft carrier around in the water. It's like it just seems to take forever to even get it to go a couple degrees. And then some new study like the Arrive trial came out when I was finishing residency, and it suddenly changed everybody's practice again. And now it's just like one fire pops up every time you put one out, or a couple fires, pop up. So I'm glad that there are people on the inside that are trying to change it. I sort of see myself as building a life raft because I'm not as optimistic maybe that we can change it. Do you have other colleagues that are able to, you're able to lean into a little bit, that are just as optimistic, or am I poking a bear here?
Not really. I don't really have, sorry. I don't really have people that I think know their deepest sort of feelings and thoughts on the matter yet. I'm kind of just starting out. I'm sure that there are people that I'm surrounded by that kind of would share a lot of the same feelings and all that, but I'm not really sure yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's like these key mentors pop up in our life. And I remember going to home birth. I had no idea that home birth was even an option. It was that toxicity we were talking about. I just got this idea that midwives are not, as good as OBGYNs. Home birth is definitely not safe or whatever else. But in LA, I was out in LA doing my residency. It seemed like more and more women were finding doctors and midwives to care for them outside of the hospital. And it occurred to me that like these are not dumb people. These are not uneducated or like they just want to go and throw caution to the wind. They're choosing this deliberately. This is their informed decision. And so I started asking, what is it about this environment that is sort of ushering in this new interest in home birth? And the answer that came to me was kind of rocky. It was like, oh, because we're actually not, people are not feeling as safe as we've been advertising, in the hospital system. So there's always this back and forth. And then, of course, you have something catastrophic happen. And you're like, well, that's the reason we have the system. And then the last home birth I attended was like 20 minutes of labor and I didn't even make it there. The baby came out like on their floor. And I was like, everything is totally fine. So it's like this contrast between what you learn in your training versus what you end up actually ultimately experiencing in real life. And that is the age old dilemma. Like the rest of your career, you're balancing out this tension, this conflict within you. I think if I had to guess, I think you're going to end up working outside of the hospital. I'm just going to throw it out there.
You don't think I can play the game? I might be able to play the game for a little bit.
I am one of the greatest social engineers that I've ever met, and I lost the game real fast. I used to actually carry around this is like a briefcase sort of thing. Now it has like tax documents and whatnot, but I used to carry it around in residency, and I would have all of the papers that justified my unwillingness to intervene in natural childbirth around with me because I didn't want to wake up and go and do the things like the Q4 hour cervical checks and all of that. And I was like, why are we doing this? Like, this person is just in early labor. Why did we even place an epidural? Why did we induce at all? And I started carrying around all these papers to help me sort of feel better about having pushed back so much. But eventually that pushing back got me booted from the game. So here we are. Or I mean, I did choose to leave OBGYN practice in the hospital, but anyways, then we also have two babies. The first was in the hospital, the second was at home. I'm really curious about your experience, just to sort of round off this conversation. You've got natural twins, and I'm curious as to how maybe you could just walk us through what birth was like for you after seeing birth from so many different lenses, and then maybe how does that inform how you care for women now and their partners, the whole family.
Yeah, my experience having my twins was very different than what I expected, what I wanted. I obviously wanted, this beautiful like vaginal birth experience that, was going to go unmedicated and all of that. And it ended up being that, I had this vasa previa, had these twins. I actually didn't find out about the vasa previa until later on. So I'd gone all over the Bay Area looking for different doctors that were going to support me because at first, I was a low risk, person, right? Low risk pregnancy. And then found out I had twins. And so I switched to a doctor that would support vaginal twin birth. If one of the babies was breech, they would have delivered the baby breech. I was
Oh,
like,
amazing.
perfect. Drove an hour and a half away to see that doctor. And then we find out I have a vasa previa. And now we're just like, all right, we got to wait and see if it moves. And it never moved and ended up being in the hospital for a month. And then one of them is supposedly IUGR. And it was sort of, it was a great thing. I loved being pregnant, but man, the interactions I had with the medical system were not what I was expecting or wanting at all.
Wow.
That month in the hospital was probably the most stressful of all because, there was, issues kind of deciding what my due date was, right? My previous doctor, they wanted to go with one due date. The hospital team wanted to go with a different due date. They wanted to go with the due date that would mean I would deliver even earlier than the 35, 36 week recommendation. And of course, I pushed back on that, because me, right? I was like, no, I want to go with the due date that's going to let us push it back just a little bit longer. I don't want to have 33-week babies because you guys, want to use this inaccurate due date from an ultrasound that didn't even, we didn't even have a heartbeat yet, so
Oh my gosh.
um, every day while I was in that hospital, I had a different team of doctors and residents coming to me trying to convince me to, have the babies on this day, try to convince me to stay on bed rest. And I was like, there's no evidence to support that. Every day, a different team would have the same conversation with me, and I'd have to push back the same way. And it was like mind numbing. And I realized through that experience, I understood why, why so many of my clients as a doula would just kind of give in. You're in this state where you're vulnerable and you're scared for yourself, for your babies. And you've got these people that are kind of just wearing on you. And so that was really stressful. That was really hard.
How long were you in the hospital
But
for?
I was in the hospital for a little over a month.
Oh my God, Caitlyn. Wow. That is absolutely different, I'm sure, from what you saw the positive pregnancy test. I'm sure you did not anticipate that happening.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, I thought that I was going to be the most low risk person ever. It was going to go exactly like all of my, all the births that I supported went. And I was equipped. I was like educationally equipped for that, I could give any argument for why I didn't want cervical checks or why, why I wanted to make this decision over that decision. But when it came to a twin pregnancy with a vasoprevia, I had never heard of a vasoprevia at that point. Even having worked as a nurse, I didn't know what a vasoprevia was. It's like one out of every
Tell
2,500,
everybody what it is.
pregnancies.
Yeah, it's a pretty unusual thing. Tell everybody just, elevator.
Yeah. So it's where a fetal blood vessel from the, placenta goes over the cervical opening. So, if you were to dilate and try to give birth vaginally, and baby would likely bust open that blood vessel, and baby would bleed out within minutes. And so that's why they had me sitting in the hospital for over a month, because not for any other reason, but if my water was just like happened to break, or if I was to happen to go into labor and that blood vessel would break, then I would need to be right next to the OR to have a chance at saving them. So
Wow.
yeah, it's not what I expected, and I was not equipped for it. So I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. So it was kind of a nice experience in that way, because I had no way to advocate for myself. And that's how most of my clients as a doula, most of my patients, that's the position they're in. They don't have the education and the information they need to be able to advocate for themselves, and feeling that like sense of helplessness was very frustrating, very stressful. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember those. I developed some very, very close relationships with patients who had, well, I call them clients because they're not sick, but clients who had, stayed there. In one case, it was twins. It wasn't a vasoprevia, but both twins were like definitely on the small side. And I think they were Modi twins as well. So, because I think we were monitoring for twin to twin transfusion syndrome. So, anyways, I think I scanned her. I did a BPP on her every single day for like 3 weeks. And fortunately, it was just me, but I got to know her so well that I was actually able to be a great advocate. But generally, what happens in teaching hospitals, you're going to have a new team every single day. Whoever's the one rounding that day or whatever on the antepartum service, it's usually the MFM du jour, or maybe a week's worth of one MFM with some random ass resident who's just doing their best to keep up, let alone sit and just get to know you and be with you. That was one of the things I was actually really criticized for, was because I spent too much time with patients. Well, you just described how horrible that was. And this particular client, she would send me photos of them for like 3 years. She sent me photos, and these little kids grew up to be great. She's like, thank you. Like, you're the one that kept these kiddos around. And I, of course, didn't do that, but I provided her with just a little semblance of like routine humanity. And that made all the difference for her. And I think that experience, despite everything that we described, I would be I'm certain that colors your sort of view as to how this can be done best
And
as
I'll
your
say,
arc.
I'll add that during that experience, during that month, all of those people that came into my room, all those people that induced this like constant state of stress, and they also saved my baby's life. And I can't negate that. They took care of us, and my kiddos would probably not be around if it wasn't for them. But they did cause a lot of stress, and I'd cry, almost every day as a result of it. And then there was this one nurse, this one person out of all of them that actually spent time with me, and she was the only one that was willing to go against the grain a little bit and tell me, when I was unsure of myself, when I was starting to lose, my grit a little bit, and what I knew, what I felt in my heart was right. She was the only person that was going to be like, you do what you want, you do what you feel is right.
Yeah.
If you want to wait one extra week to have these babies because of that, that due date that you had for the entirety of your pregnancy, and you feel comfortable with that, you stick with that. And I know that that's not the kind of thing that she's supposed to say to me, but she went against the grain a little bit, and is because she knew me and because she spent time with me, and had rapport with me. And she made the whole difference. I mean, and I think that that's a really a great example of the kind of person and provider and midwife I want to be.
So you had a C-section, you've got twins. How old are your kiddos?
They're two now.
2 years old. And you said they're boys, right? Or girls? I can't remember.
They're boys.
Two little boys. So if you did, are you planning on having any other children, do you think?
Yes.
Okay. So
Probably pretty soon.
that's awesome. Well, you can always reach out if you have any needs. I'm right around the corner, it turns out. Um, so my last question for you is if you do get pregnant and have another baby, what is your dream birth experience? Like, let's manifest it right now.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I had a C-section, and I also had a low vertical incision, which will
Oh,
cherry on top of that whole pregnancy.
gosh.
Um, but I would like to try a VBAC. And so that would be my my goal. I mean, my dream birth would be to try for a VBAC, to stay home for a little while. That's the part that I'm really struggling with, is will I choose to actually spend any amount of time at home where I know that things will progress better and where I'll feel more comfortable? Or will I go into the hospital right away and be poked and prodded, and but I'll be there in case something happens. So that's kind of debating that a little bit. But in the end, if I have vaginal birth, I will be happy. I don't care how it goes, honestly. I don't have super high expectations. The only thing I really want is that vaginal birth. That's what happens. I'll be happy as a clam.
I remember I was just thinking, after having a baby, whether it's vaginal or by C-section, there's a period of you're just so depleted and you're breastfeeding and you're trying to figure this out. But you had not just a C-section, you also had twin boys. That must have been a tremendously hard period in your life, recovering after a C-section with two little babies that are constantly wanting to be fed.
Yeah, it was horrible. And the C-section was rough. I hemorrhaged and they had to open things back up. And so the recovery process, I think, was very, very painful, very difficult. They were in the NICU for 11 days. And the NICU, as great as the NICU nurses are, and, making sure the babies grow and all of that, they don't really always have the priority on being like on supporting breastfeeding, or making sure that you're set up for when you go back home and you have to somehow keep these tiny little babies alive. And so for the first like 2.5 months of their lives, I was just exclusively pumping. And it's a miracle, I think, that they figured out how to latch onto the nipple, because I wasn't allowed to breastfeed them really most of the time that I was in the NICU, and they didn't know how to do it. And somehow I was able to get them to do it. And man, I remember, yeah, like crying every day, like wondering if it was going to work. It took probably 6 weeks of excessive, like just trying to force it almost, before it was really working. But for me, that was like one thing that I could give them, because, they came early, because they're twins. They're, not really, they're smaller. They're by nature going to be smaller. They're going to, have to share, nutrients and all of that. And so I didn't want to give up on that last thing that I could give them, breastfeeding. Like, it's a little advantage I can tack
Yeah.
onto them at the very last minute there. So
Wow. Well, Caitlin, I hope that you have the dream birth. And I hope that people will, reach out to you if they have questions. You do have a product line. Is it Lila or Lila?
I call it Lila, but I think most people call it Lila, which either is fine.
That's fine. Yeah. Why don't you tell people where they can find you on the interwebs, as well as a little bit more about Lila?
Yeah, Lila is a line. It's my company where I make a line of accessible, comfy, beautiful alternatives to a hospital gown. I wore them when I was in the hospital for a month with my twins, and went viral on TikTok, and people loved them. So you can find them at my website, www.wearlila.com, Lila. And yeah, they're nice. We've got a lot of different versions for people who want to be more covered up, versions for people who get hot in labor and don't want, want to show a lot of skin, whatever you want, but just kind of make that birth experience just a little bit more comfortable, a little bit more humanized, feel less like a patient and more like a person.
They are beautiful, I have to say. Like I didn't even realize that was your product when I first saw, some videos of you wearing it and whatnot. It almost doesn't look like a hospital gown. I mean, of course it doesn't, because hospital gowns are just so starchy and impersonal, but they actually look like a beautiful dress, almost like a
It's
kimono.
it's supposed to. Yeah, the very original design that has like a low back so you can get your epidural placed if you want one, or you can have TENS units put on your back. The reason I did it that way rather than like a Velcro, whatever that you could open it up and stuff, is because I wanted it to be like a dress you could go out to the grocery store with, like
Yeah.
feel like it's, nice like that. So
Yeah, that's awesome. So wearlila.com, and how about your Instagram or TikTok?
yeah, so my TikTok is the modern midwife. And my Instagram is, I think it's Caitlyn Schollmeier. Haven't changed it yet, but
Right on.
yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Caitlin, for spending some time with me, and I'm sure we'll be in touch. Let me know if you ever need anything. I'm here just to across the state border over here in Louisville.
Thank you. And it's great talking to you. Thanks for inviting me.
My pleasure.